Well, it's April 2022 and we've just finished the 76th running of the Sydney Hobart Yacht Race. And I'm delighted to say our guest today, Tony Ellis, has sailed in 53 of those races, an all-time record. Tony, that must be a very proud record to have.
It is, Peter. I'm very disappointed we missed the year before because I was looking forward and probably still will do 55 now that I'm just about there. But yeah, it would have been 54. But anyway, that's how it is. And yeah, it's certainly a lot of fun sailing on No Limit with David Gates. Very enjoyable boat to sail on.
Well, we're not going to go through every boat you've sailed on and every of the 53 races, but let's start. Where did sailing become part of your life, Tony?
As long as I can remember. As a kid, I wanted to go sailing and eventually ended up in Mossman. I started sailing down at Middle Harbour 16s in the B division, and it was a lot of fun. I ended up in there with a couple of other guys in an old snub-nosed 12-footer, unlimited sail. There were three of us, heavy as hell, no buoyancy tanks. We had a hell of a lot of fun, did quite well. And I had the best capsize ever in that. We were screaming down Middle Harbour in a stiff nor'easter on school holidays, and we hit the wave in front and did a complete Catherine wheel. It was fantastic. And we paddled and drifted into Balmoral to get the water out of it and sail back home that afternoon. And
but were your family involved in sailing? Was your father involved?
My grandfather was. He was a sea captain, sailed out of Newcastle, and he's in there's a small book out and a lot of old sea captains on the Australian coast, and he's in that, and in the museum and Maritime Museum in Newcastle. But my father, no, he never had any desire to. He was a bushie. But
and then you graduated into 16-foot skiffs?
16s, well, the three of us actually went from Torment in sailed with Billy Spicer, Stan Spicer's son, in the 16s. We sailed there for a while. In fact, in the Torment was my first boat, the snub-nosed 12-footer out the heads. I remember walking home and Mum thought I looked a bit sort of smart-assy, and she said, "Where have you been?" And I said, "Oh, out the heads," and she just rolled her eyes. There wasn't any point in saying anything else.
Little did she ever know that her son would have done 53 Sydney Hobart races.
No. But anyway, after that, first offshore racing was done out of here with a bloke by the name of Bob Rusk, who owned Salacia 1, which was a Muir-built boat out of Hugh and Pine. Sparkman and Stevens designed and did the 63 Hobart race.
So that was your first Hobart race?
First Hobart race.
So did you jump from skiffs straight into yachts?
Mixing the two up.
Yeah, and a lot of people did in those days, didn't they?
Yeah, and you sort of tended to stick around because there wasn't the alternatives and the scope and sailing and the number of regattas. It's so much. It's very hard to keep crews together these days because you want to go around to the different classes of boats and so forth. And I must say, from my experience, the younger guys coming up, they talked to me and said, never ever stop sailing little boats. I think it's quite, if you want to stay really good at sailing, you've got to keep with your little boats.
But when you did your first Hobart race on Salacia, had you done a lot of lead-up races like Bird Islands and Cabbage Trees and things like that?
In fact, in those days, it was almost traditional that you sailed home from Hobart the year before just to get an experience of going to sea in a boat and so forth, which I had done. But that year, I remember it quite well. It blew like dogs off a chain going up Storm Bay, snowing on Mount Nelson.
And what was that, 63?
63,
yeah. The first of Freya's victories, wasn't it?
Yeah, yes, it was. She won 3 in a row. And I remember watching, we were keeping a very close eye on the port cap shroud because it had actually, one strand had actually broken off and coming out of the swage at the bottom. And so it was like this all the way up Storm Bay. Yeah. But then went on, did another race with Salacia, and I think Arthur Byrne bought it the next year, and he went on to build Salacia 2, which was in the 71 Admirals Cup as a sister boat virtually to the first rags of Syd.
Yeah. And then after Salacia, did you still continue to race skiffs and
yeah,
yachts?
And then I sailed with Norm Brooker down in Middle Harbour, did one race there, and I was really determined to do the America's Cup after Gretel won in 62. And I was I weighed the two boats up as which one to concentrate on.
Right, but sorry, if you interrupt there, you sail with Norm, what, on Seawind?
Seawind, I did one race with him, that's all.
To Hobart?
Yeah, and then...
America's Cup got on the horizon for you?
Yeah, it was very much on the horizon in 65, after 65, 66, and I sort of eyed off, and I sort of went for the Warwick Hood design. It was also a brand new boat. I don't know why Packer didn't build another boat, possibly because after 62, if you recall, when they won a race, the Americans sort of put the embargo on their cloth, country of origin cloth, and of course Australia didn't even have a manufacturing of any cloth in those days, and whether the sales in Gretel 1 would have been grandfathered, so I suppose they just stuck with the boat to see what they could do. But
So how did you get to become part of the crew of Dame Pattie?
I tried out. There was a trial run on the boat when it hit the water. I went out the first day when we actually lost our mast, actually.
I can remember being at Watson's Bay and I saw her sail down the harbour and then I saw her coming back under tow with a broken mast. I still remember it.
Yeah, well, I was on board that day and I sort of ducked off from work and just said, I'll
be back shortly.
Be back tomorrow, sort of thing. Well, I didn't go to work. I sort of called in sick, as you did in those days, and the next minute you're on bloody TV.
Yes. But was there a strong selection process for Dame Pattie?
Yeah, a lot of people tried out for it.
Yeah.
And quite a few good friends of mine, and yours too. Cole Wyman was there as well, and he and I were very good friends, and both trying out pretty much for the same position on the boat.
So you were running for the bow or one of the forward hands?
One of the bowed positions, yeah. And Pattie O'Donnell ran the bow, Johnny Taylor from Melbourne, and myself ended up as the three bow people on the boat.
Well, a lot of famous people, of course. Jock Sturrock steered the boat, and Norm Wright and Sandy Schofield, and some real characters on board.
Yeah, there were, and Billy Barnett, of course, who built
the boat, and Norm
built
Booth.
that, and built Gretel too as well.
Yeah. And talk us about that America's Cup campaign, Tony, going to Newport.
Well, it was a pretty interesting session. In fact, prior to it, we got to know the Gretel guys pretty well, and also Alan Payne. And Alan Payne, when I was 13, I'd actually designed a boat fully, and all the calcs, the whole offsets, everything, and sent it off to Alan for comment, because he was sort of top Australian naval architect in those days. And well, I met him eventually in '67 in the squadron, and I said, "You probably don't remember me," and he said, "I remember you very well." And we became extremely firm friends after that, as I did Warwick Hood and myself after that cup, and remained, solid friends.
So what happened to the design?
With Warwick?
Yeah.
Oh, my design.
Your design,
I
yes.
got it back. I lost it somewhere. I've still got Alan's letter that he sent me afterwards, sort of saying, commenting on it and so forth. It's still somewhere amongst a whole heap of boxes of photographs.
Why don't you build one to that design?
No, I'd have to remember what it was like. It'd be a bit old-fashioned too, Peter. Give it a break.
Yeah. But let's talk about the America's Cup. I think Dame Pattie was, fair to say, probably outclassed over there with a wonderful boat against the Americans.
It was a good. The big problem was the sails. With American sails, we were a good boat. We actually trialled until they told them to stop. Columbia, which was their second boat, and the New York Yacht Club sort of told them that they were very displeased with their cooperating with the Challenger, so to speak, politely. And but with the with American-made cloth and Joey Pierce sails, we were very, very competitive with Columbia. With Australian cloth, it was touch and go all the time. And of course, Intrepid, well, she was a class above herself, and the syndicate did actually protest Intrepid for a few points, and they actually asked us as a crew whether we wanted to go along in full protester. Because what they'd done, and we suspect they'd done, was to actually submit to Lloyd's a heavier timber to get a thinner skin, and then build it out of a lighter timber, which with Oregon you can get a big variation in the density. And if you work it out over the skin area, you can save probably 700, 800 kilos, which if you take
significant
that weight out of the ends and then put it into the keel, that's like weight in the keel on a metre boat is like candy on a stick. It's just
gold.
Great. And all summer. And anyway, they elected after discussion with the syndicate and the crew not to actually pursue that line of protest against the boat and inspection. So nothing really eventuated from it. But all summer, she was certainly the stiffest boat in Newport by a long way. She's quite noticeably stiffer.
Am I right in saying that one of the trial horses for Dame Pattie was Nefertiti?
Yes, you are. And it was
tell us about the colourful skipper of Nefertiti.
Well, she didn't perform, and in fact, there was a book written after the 1964 defence campaign about Nefertiti, and it was called Black Clouds, White Sails, Black Clouds. I can't remember which way it was, and it was fairly appropriate. She wasn't a good boat. She was sort of very extreme on beam. She was also one of the biggest on the 12-metre rule. You could build a big J, but your overlap was sort of fixed under the rule. And she had very big headsails, but the boat was never a performer all that year. The two boats in '64 were American Eagle and obviously Constellation, who got the nod towards the final rounds.
But wasn't one of the crew of Nefertiti a colourful CYC identity?
I can't remember now. I really can't.
Wasn't it Peter Kurtz?
He may have been there.
Yeah,
there
I
were
think he was.
quite a few. We were sort of pretty much
I
concentrating.
think he was one of the helmsmen.
Richard Dixon was concentrating. Richard ended up on the crew, and we pretty much settled down to the Cup crew early on, and we didn't go quite the way of the American. They did in '62, sorry, where they had a drinking crew and a sailing crew, but sort of fairly all combined to behave a bit.
But nonetheless, even though it was a 4-0 to Intrepid, it was a great experience, I guess.
It was, and I think the boat, and it was the second fastest in Newport that year, but it was just very unfortunate because people forget with the sail making, with the spinnaker cloth, on the acceptance, we're getting the cloth before they sent it to sail makers, there was something like a 90% rejection of the finished product. That's how much problems there were in making, and starting from scratch, and particularly with also the headsails and mainsails, particularly the fine looms in Australia that actually get the deniers per centimetre that the American, and all Hood's cloth in those days, his machines were beefed up to make that cloth, and we just didn't have the stuff here. But Bradmill and Cadron did a phenomenal job, and still Cadron I think is still around making cloth today, or Contender I think it's now called.
Yeah. Well, after the America's Cup in '67, I remember right next to where we are now at the CYC, there was a beautiful boat that no one had ever seen the like of before, launched here right on the slips here at the CYC in 1968, and that was the original Ragamuffin.
Yeah.
And you were part of that original crew. How did you get to join up with Syd and Graham Newlands and those boys?
Well, actually, I came home first up. I did the Olympic trials with Pod and Boothie and the Dragons and the 5.5s, which we came second in both classes, and then so I didn't do the Hobart that year. That was '67, and eventually only just got home in time anyway. But then I got a call from Graham, and he rang me up.
Graham Newland?
Yeah, and said, come over and have a chat. So I called in. He had that marine business up at Cremorne. Then he said, we're building a boat. Would you like to have a look? I said, oh, he showed me, and I had a look at the plans, and knowing a little bit about boats. And I said, looks very interesting. Do you want to sail? I said, yeah. So that was it. And
simple as that.
As simple as that. Yeah. And
well, what a mighty boat.
It turned out a terrific boat, and I remember the whole boat was put together with a very, very good crew. It was a sprinkling of a lot of Caprica Hewan's crew from the '67 Admirals Cup, and a lot of America's Cup 12-metre crew on it. So it was a really good crew that we started off with. And Quilkie built the boat, did a phenomenal job on building it, and everything was meticulously had attention paid to it in those days, and we weighed everything. When the boat was finally decked, everything was ready, motor was in it, and Graham put ingots in to represent the mast and distribution of other things that weighed the boat exactly, and then he worked out exactly what we could put in the keel, and Olin was actually Herman Freya's last boat when he was working for, before he hung up his own shingle, when he was with Olin. He had internal ballast and pockets in the keel. Well, they all went, and there was still a little bit of spare weight, and so Graham actually and Olin, nobody ever knew about this at the time. It was kept very, very quiet for a long while, and put an 8-inch thick skin of lead over the keel as well. And the boat, as you recall, stood up like a church and went to windward like a freight train. And Stevens actually was quite surprised because we beat both Aura and Bay B, which were aluminium versions of the boat, and when we met them in Europe, we were still quicker than both upwind.
And did you know Syd before you joined the crew?
I'd met him very, very briefly after a Hobart race in the Tribunner. It's in the book with David Salter. I'd met him there, and of course I was only a young teenager. He was in his 30s. And still doing a bit of heavyweight boxing, and there weren't many girls around those days. And anyway, we were all trying to chat up anything in sight and did send me back to go and get a drink or something. He came back and said, abused me. He said, piss off or I'll knock your head off. And we became quite good friends after that.
You've been very courteous for Syd. But Tony, just quickly aside from the yachting, you were studying engineering, is that right, at this time?
Yes, I spent a lot of time. Initially after engineering, I worked for Monia Precast and did a lot of design work and travelling around Australia. Then I ended up with a job with Nabalco, which was built the whole Gove alumina plant. I spent quite a lot of time in the Northern Territory up there and came back, and that was a 3-4 year project. And then after that I sort of did a lot of work for myself, built bits and pieces everywhere, and then went off and worked for Jimmo Bignano all over the place with him, and in between doing a bit of sailing with Syd.
Well, getting back to the original Ragamuffin, and I mean, she took everything by storm here when she was launched, but she won the Fastnet race in 71, which you were aboard.
That was correct, yeah.
She went to the Admirals Cup in 69, 71 and 73. But interestingly, she never won the Hobart race.
No,
I mean, disappointingly, I'm sure, for Syd and the crew, but she never won the Hobart.
Missed out close, yeah, but a lot of, if you look at the results of Syd over the years, I think there's something like 20 podiums in there, in the Hobart race. But yeah, quite a few near misses, but that's, the Hobart race is how it goes.
Exactly.
I remember the year against, we just lost the race, and I think it was only a few minutes to Pasha.
Pasha, 70, yeah.
And she, of course, we had a hard nor'easter for probably 40 hours of the race. Now, if that had been a little bit less, she was way ahead of us when the sou'wester or southerly came in. And I remember we went inside Maria Island that year and before we went up the last bit to the Tasman Island, it was a southerly. And I ran a very, as accurate as you could, plot on where we were going, and I was pretty confident. You couldn't see much. And Graham was on the helm at the time, and I said, we've got to be past Tasman Island, because I was running actually, but it worked out to be pretty quick, something like 12 degrees of leeway in that sea. And and Peter Henry actually spotted the light. And we had gone slightly to the south of it, quite well to the south, and then we one leg up Storm Bay, being a southerly, and into the Derwent. And we did make the mistake of putting a kite on the river. We did a big broach in the river, which slowed us down a bit more. And ended up, I think, a few minutes on handicap in the end. But if a nor'easter had been a few hours shy, would have been different. And that's how it is. Well, that's typical Hobart race.
Exactly. But the 69 Admirals Cup, Australia was second. Unfortunately, Kumalu.
No, that was 71.
71. She did the rudder.
She split the rudder, broke a rudder in 71.
Yeah. 69, we were second, weren't we?
Second again. That was the two Kaufman boats, Mercedes and Kumalu. That's right, yeah. And then Rags was actually top point scorer over there and won the Royal Ocean Racing Club championship as well. Then in 71, we were over there. We won that again, and we were leading into the Admirals Cup as a team, and then Kumalu lost the rudder in the Fastnet race, and we had one of the best rides ever coming back from Fastnet. I'll never forget it, because we did a full-on all-standing jibe, blew the ounce and a half, it disappeared into the Irish Sea, and then we had a poled-out headsail for a while until things died down a bit, and we dropped below 12 knots and said we've got to have more power, so I stopped up. I'd actually started stopping the storm kite. We whacked that up, and the three legs up there, she wouldn't break, and finally she broke, and bang, off she went. And Syd said, I've got too much power. It was too late then. Don't complain. But we had one hell of a ride, and literally Doug Patterson, who had bought video, took some video of it towards the end, but that was when it had died down. But we had the bow wave was literally going over the top of the spinnaker pole and landing behind the boat. It was fantastic.
And what a thrill to win the Fastnet.
Oh, it was. Well, Yankee Girl was just following us. They had a pole, and they were 56-footer, and they passed us a minute from the finishing line to take line on us in the Admirals Cup. And it was a terrific race, that one. It was really very, very memorable for all on board. And then, and unfortunately with Kumalu, and we found out what happened to their rudder, and the way the rudder was actually made, and we got a home and took Rags's rudder apart and found it was made the same way. So by the grace of God, we didn't break Rags's rudder as well, and it was considerably strengthened straight away, the way it was constructed. Yeah. And then we went on to 73, and I redesigned a lot of alterations because the rule had changed then, and I sent my designs off to Owen, and he ratified them, and we were very, very careful, and well, I was very, very careful, keeping in mind one thing that he was adamant about. He was quite the opposite of Alan. He said, rate low, go slow. So it was making sure that we were getting the rating down a little bit to remain competitive, but without taking any adversely, if at all, affecting the boat speed. So we were very, very gentle on all we did to the boat.
And she had those rating bumps, as they call it, didn't she, down the waterline for 73?
Yeah. And we played around under the water quite a bit too, because in those days you were starting to take a penalty from memory. I knew the rule pretty well in those days, in fact, like the back of my hand, which I'll come to on the next boat, which is quite funny.